Good evening. I am recording outside the school in Caen, France, where I've been teaching. And I appreciate you being in class today. For me, it's Wednesday night, about 6:45. For you, it's probably about 11:45 a.m. So you're probably eating lunch on Wednesday about now, and it's almost time for dinner here in Caen. So there's about 7 hours. Well, there is 7 hours difference. It's about 55 degrees here, so it's warmer here than it is where you are. That's not always the case, but it's pretty rainy here. I'm enjoying my trip a lot. Tomorrow I get a day off because I've been teaching a lot of hours each day this week about international law. So tomorrow I get a day off and I'm headed to the Normandy beaches and the cemetery for that. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some real history that will be moving and interesting, I'm sure. So I appreciate you being patient with me and let me have this opportunity. Thanks for being in class today. All right, so let's go over the quiz that you had last time just to be sure that you have the answers and so you can make sure you know the answers. First of all, the first question was an estate for years may be converted at its conclusion into a periodic tenancy. True or false? And that one's true. That's something to watch out for. So if your lease ends and you decide to just sit there and not move out, you may end up with a periodic tenancy. And we'll talk a bit more about how that can be kind of tough on you in some circumstances. So watch out for that. All right. Another one is tenant at sufferance has no right or permission to be on the property, but is still not a trespasser since his original entry on the property was legal, and that is true. Third question, I believe, is interesting. We talked about Fair Housing Act already, and a tester may try to uncover illegal renting practices under that act. If a tester does that, they actually can recover money damages from the landlord, even though the tester did not intend to actually rent the premises. Next question. Under the Federal Civil Rights Act, a landlord may not discriminate against a lawyer. Very sad. That's actually false because lawyer is not a category covered under the Federal Civil Rights Act. So if you look at that act, it has certain protected classes such as race and gender, but it does not include lawyer. Another one is in the absence of a lease provision, a tenant usually may use the property for any legal purpose. The answer is true, and this is why you do want, pardon the sirens, this is why you do want to put something in your lease about the purpose of the lease so that you don't end up with this problem. So if you do have certain restrictions for the tenant about how they can use the property, put it in the lease. It's always a good idea to spell everything out anyway. Number 6, in most states, a tenant whose business becomes unprofitable as a result of governmental action may cancel the lease. So what could happen? Well, for example, you could have a situation where the government changes the roads. That happens in Jonesboro sometimes, and it makes your business less profitable at your location because of the road situation. Or maybe some other governmental action such as taxing or regulations or zoning. The answer, though, is that doesn't give you the right to cancel the lease. Unless, of course, if you somehow had put something in the lease, but it's hard to have foresight enough to do that and have a landlord that will agree to that. So if there's nothing in the lease about that, then the fact that you became unprofitable won't work to cancel the lease. All right, another question. A lease legally required to be in writing must specify the rent. True or false? Well, you can look in the book and you can see what's required to be in the lease at a minimum. And one thing that's required is rent. And so that one's true. Look again at that list, though, and look at this one. A lease legally required to be in writing must include a provision stating who has the duty to keep the property repaired. Well, it's really, really smart to put this in your lease, but it doesn't have to be there to make it a valid lease. And so that one was false. Number 9, because a lease conveys to the tenant an exclusive right to possess the premises, a landlord needs the tenant's permission to enter. And the answer to that one is true. And so basically for that situation, a landlord needs the tenant's permission. Now what a landlord can do is put something in the lease that provides that permission. And so that's a possibility, but it does need to be permission because the landlord generally gives the tenant the right to quiet possession. Now obviously the landlord is going to want to have something in the lease that says the landlord can come in for making repairs and those types of things. So having a good lease is valuable to make things easier for everybody. Number 10, the last true-false. The advantage for both commercial landlords and tenants using a percentage rent approach with a breakpoint is that the landlord can share in the tenant's success while the tenant pays a lower rental fee until its sales hit a predetermined level. And that one is true. I'm sorry that doesn't show on the screen because the screen's a little bit small. That one is actually true. All right, so let me go to the next slide here. Now, one example that was a real example from a real case that I gave you a question about is this one. So Shakespeare leased property to Sinclair Refining Company for a term of 5 years at a rental of $5,000 per month. 33 days before the end of the term, Sinclair notified Shakespeare that it would be vacating the premises. But Sinclair did not actually move until 4 months after the end of the term. So what does Sinclair claim? They claim they are liable only for 4 months' rent, since the original lease called for a monthly rental. But Shakespeare claims that Sinclair is liable for an additional 5 years' rent as a holdover tenant. And so who's correct here? So this one was a little tricky for you, maybe not. We'll see. Some of you are pretty good at catching my tricks, but this is a real case. Now what actually happened is, neither of those are correct. Sinclair is liable for only 1 year's rent. So it's not correct that it was 4 months, and it's not correct that it's 5 years. So look at the bottom of page 427 of the book. Let me sit down here and take a look at that for a moment and read to you the appropriate language. So near the bottom of that page, it says, under the common law, when the original lease was for a term of more than 1 year, the periodic tenancy is considered to be from year to year. And so since this was a 5-year lease, they're considering the periodic tenancy to be from year to year. Now keep in mind that it can be bad to be a holdover tenant because you can get caught up in some things like a year-to-year lease. And so best not to do that. Sometimes leases will explain in the lease what happens if there's a holdover tenant. And that can be helpful to clarify the situation. But if there's nothing in the lease, this is what can happen. All right, another one that I think we may have talked about before, but I did want to give you a question about it. An intruder raped a State University student in her dorm early one morning. The dormitory doors, although equipped with locks, were always kept unlocked. Prior to the rape, campus security had received reports of men being seen in the women's bathroom, and the student had personally complained twice to a dorm manager about strangers loitering in lounges and hallways. Stories about numerous crimes in dormitories had also been published in the student newspapers. Is the state liable to the student for damages? Why or why not? The answer is, of course, yes. There was a case in 1984 about this, and there have been other cases too. And this case basically says the student may recover damages against the landlord, the state, upon a showing that there was reasonably foreseeable likelihood of criminal intrusion. Note that word, foreseeability. You've probably seen that if you took legal environment of business and you thought about proximate clause in negligent torts. So if there was a reasonably foreseeable likelihood of criminal intrusion into the building, that the state negligently failed to keep the outer doors locked, and the failure was a proximate cause of the student's rape or the injury. So it's very likely that the state is going to be liable in a case like this, and they were liable in Miller versus State. All right, thank you very much, and I hope you are having a great end of the semester, and I'm going to add one more video and then call it a day. So I'll talk to you again in a separate video in a few minutes. Thanks.